The cuffs bit. Cold, tight, humiliating. I'd clocked out 5 minutes earlier and then I was up against the wall outside the staff elevator, badge still warm on my scrubs, under the kind of fluorescent light that makes everyone look guilty. A detective said negligence like it was my middle name. They said Mrs. Delaney was dead and I was why. I smelled antiseptic and old coffee and my own fear. I was the meticulous one, triple checker, a nurse who counted pills twice and labeled syringes like they were newborns. Compassion was my stupid superpower. I tucked blankets, warmed hands, remembered grandkids' names. I was also the nurse with 2 extra patients because of temporary staff adjustments, which meant budget cuts with a smile. Westbridge City Hospital's night shift hummed with monitors, badge scanners chirping like the world's most annoying chorus, and that dry rattle of paperwork that never stopped. We were always short. We were always told to work smarter. Days before Mrs. Delaney's heart failed, normal cracked. A med cart drawer had been swapped, same label, different contents. A fall risk alarm had been silenced, and no one admitted touching it. An order sat in the chart with no attending signature, just a floating set of initials like a ghost had approved it. In billing, Mrs. Delaney suddenly gained a cardiac bundle and a comfort care kit, both billed twice. Protocols changed overnight on the intranet, same title, new steps buried in paragraph 4. Profits over patients, cleaned up and typed nice. I didn't sleep. I compiled everything. A quiet file, screenshots, timestamps, scans of paper orders that shouldn't have existed. I named the report Blue Canary and hid it under a harmless attachment in a folder called Potluck Sign Up. I told one person, "Because you're not supposed to be alone with poison." "Bat me," I whispered at 2 a.m. in the med room. Maya squeezed my wrist. Always. By morning in the county holding cell, the concrete bench sucked the heat from my legs. Paperwork rasped somewhere out of sight. Grief sat heavy. Betrayal pricked like a fever. Fear breathed in my ear. Resolve dug in its heels. My public defender slid into view, tie crooked. "Full disclosure," he said. "I've represented Westbridge before." My stomach flipped. I asked him to pull my phone logs. He frowned. "That text to Maya isn't in the evidence file. It was there last night. Now it wasn't." I replayed the night Mrs. Delaney coded. I remembered her thin fingers wrapped around mine, the way her grandson had FaceTimed to show her his new apartment, the way she laughed like she still owned her lungs. I remembered scanning her meds. The scanner chirped, green, correct. I remembered the drip rate, the alarm that never fired. Did I miss it? Did someone make sure I would? I asked for my backup, the USB I kept in my locker, insurance against gaslighting. They said it was corrupted. Funny, the detective said. Nothing about it was funny. By mid-morning, the cell door buzzed. "Brooks," the guard called. "Visitor." Not my sister, not my union rep. In the booth, behind thick glass, sat a man in a suit I recognized from staff meetings. Risk Management, Westbridge. He slid a folded note through the slot, crisp as a scalpel, and didn't blink. "Blue Canary," the note said in my own file name, block letters like a threat or a promise. "You were never supposed to see this," he murmured, voice flat, eyes on me like he was measuring pulse without touching. And they already moved the numbers. "I'm Clara Brooks, 33, and I've been a nurse for over a decade. I work the night shift at Westbridge City Hospital in the elderly ward, a place filled with both life and decay, where time seems to slow down. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting harsh shadows that blend into the cool, sterile white walls. The hum of machines, monitors beeping, IV pumps ticking, intersects with the distant echo of heel clacks and hushed conversations, creating a symphony of urgency that never quite fades. The air is thick with the sense of antiseptic and something else, a hint of despair that settles in after midnight, wrapping around me like an unwant. My younger brother's wedding slipped away into a blur of medical charts and patient calls. My heart aches when I scroll through the photos of moments I missed, laughter whirling around me while I held the hands of strangers, fighting battles I felt I could never win. At home, my apartment feels emptier than usual. I can't recall the last time I made dinner for myself, let alone caught up with friends over weekend brunch. My boyfriend Mark has started to resent the shift changes. He says I'm more married to my job than to him. He doesn't understand that when Mrs. Delaney or Mr. Thompson needs me, I don't just have a choice to walk away. It's all-consuming. Each patient becomes a part of my extended family. Their lives rest on the stretches of my compassion. Yet I often find myself silently fighting tears at the end of a shift, aching to be needed, but coming up short in my own life. The loneliness gnaws at me. I've nearly emptied my bank account on last-minute flyovers for family milestones. I wasn't there when my sister delivered her baby, a boy I still haven't met. Moments swell with regret, and sometimes I can't help but wonder when I'll pay the price for all those absences. The night shift feels endless, but what feels worse is wondering if my family believes I still care about them, despite always being caught in someone else's emergency. Tonight, it all combines into a sense of foreboding as I pass through the ward. I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. Just last week, Dr. Penn seemed unusually distracted, his hand almost brushing aside an alarm that blared for too long before someone else acknowledged it. On my rounds, one of my colleagues muttered something about corners being cut, forcing us into silent compliance for the sake of profit and efficiency. It rattled me. I heard the fear in her voice, and I could sense it wouldn't be. With every patient I care for, I see a story, a cherished memory that transcends the sterile beeps and charts we inscribe them on. They aren't just statistics. They're lives full of pain, wisdom, and love. I remember Mrs. Delaney's laughter as I tucked her in, the stories about her grandkids filling the room with warmth. It makes me stir in my skin, achingly aware of the fractures between each person's care journey. And yet I can't act without playing by the rules set by those who only see figures and dollars. Something is coming to a head. I can feel it. I can almost hear the tension in the air, crackling like static just before a storm. Too many loose threads, too many whispers. And in that quiet awareness, the feeling settles deep in my gut. Every decision I make from here on out will matter, more than ever before. The click of my badge was the only sound as I walked down the sterile corridor toward the elderly ward. The air felt heavy, the kind of weight that hangs in your. I stepped into room 302 to check on Mr. Caldwell, an octogenarian with a penchant for dad jokes and mismatched socks. He was sleeping peacefully, the rise and fall of his chest a comforting rhythm. I'd just started jotting down notes when the door swung open with a bang, the sound slicing through the calm. Dr. Penn stormed in, his usually composed demeanor replaced with an irritable edge. "Brooks," he barked, causing Mr. Caldwell to stir awake. "What are you doing here? You should be handling the discharge forms for neuro patients." I felt my gut twist. I was under pressure from all sides, but I was the one who had been picking up the slack for our overburdened staff. Didn't they see that? I met his gaze with firmness, determined not to flinch. "I'm in the middle of my rounds, Dr. Penn. I'll get to the forms right after this." I watched as that familiar flicker of irritation crossed his face. "No time for that. If you don't step it up, I'll have to consider what your real priorities are," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, as if questioning my commitment to patient care. And that was the moment I realized it was only the beginning. "Maybe you understand the hurt of being unjustly accused," I thought, the words practically pooling in my throat. Too much was happening here. As he turned on his heel and left in a huff, I could feel the weight of disapproval lingering long after he'd exited. I returned my attention to Mr. Caldwell, dismissing the sting of humiliation. The morning's tension escalated when I received my first new patient of the shift, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, frail but with a fire in her gray eyes that ignited whenever she spoke. The family hovered like shadowy sentinels, their faces twisted in concern. To my shock, they were verbally harangued in the hallway by Dr. Penn just moments later, spouting off numbers and data that feigned a concern for their mother's health, while dismissing their feelings like they were an inconvenience. "Your mother is old. It's a matter of time before." The words felt like blades, sharp and unwarranted. I stepped into the fray, determination swelling in my chest. "That's enough, Dr. Penn," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the lava-like anger churning inside me. "Mrs. Thompson deserves our respect." Little did I know that this attitude would put me against the entire hospital. He turned to face me, a smirk creeping onto his lips, as if I'd just delivered punchline that only he could appreciate. "You'd do well to remember your place, Clara. You're not the doctor here." The words hung in the air, a fresh form of public discredit that seared into my skin. I watched as a couple of nurses in the hallway exchanged glances and then averted their eyes, offering silent compliance to his authority. Yet in that moment, I steadied myself, my silence a form of resistance. I didn't flinch. I noted the interaction in Mrs. Thompson's chart, every detail etched with precision. If my colleagues wanted to remain silent, I would document the neglect and the cruelty, keeping my integrity intact. I knew that every entry would matter. That this wasn't just a battle for respect. It was a fight for safety. Later in my rounds, I came across an alarm blaring in another room, a sound I couldn't ignore. I rushed in to find Mr. Jacobs, who was supposed to be monitored closely after his surgery, slumped unresponsive in a chair. "Help! Someone!" I yelled, flipping on the emergency alert button. "He's not breathing!" Chaos ensued, the room quickly filling with staff, a jumble of anxiety and panic. Dr. Penn's face was a mask of shock, but there was something else, something almost implicit in his look, as if I had just unraveled a neatly tied bow. As they wheeled Mr. Jacobs out, a knot twisted tighter in my stomach, but I couldn't give in to dread. My instinct was to act. I turned my gaze to Dr. Penn, my head held high, defiantly challenging him. "You can't overlook the signs." "Not now or ever," I said, and for a fleeting moment I felt powerful. Yet another layer of instability began to crop up. Suspicion whispered through the cracks of my mind. What if this was staged? What if I was being set up as the scapegoat to cover for broader negligence? My phone buzzed with a new message, but my heart sank as I recognized Maya's name. She wouldn't be texting me now without reason, and it was in that silence that everything began to collapse. The trust I'd cultivated over the years, the pride I took in advocacy and patient care, it felt like a house of cards ready to fall. The hospital's integrity teetered on the edge of a cliff, and I was right in the middle, teetering with it, uncertain of what awaited if I didn't act quick enough. Was I already a target? In that instant, destiny was already decided, and I still didn't know. I felt the air thicken around me as I fumbled with Mrs. Thompson's chart, the words blurring together like a bad dream. The morning's urgency had morphed into a tide of anxiety, and I was treading water, desperate to stay afloat. I wanted to believe that I'd stood my ground, that shoving back against Dr. Penn had cleared a path. But I had no idea it was still going to get worse. The moments after I'd shouted at him sprang to life in my memory. The way the fluorescent lights buzzed ominously overhead, the weight of all the eyes in the hallway weighing down on me like a shroud. My heart pounded, each thump echoing in sync with the sirens of discontent. I didn't even flinch at the looks shot my way by the nurses who previously considered me their ally. The pity in their eyes was thinly veiled behind layers of apprehension. I had hoped pushing back would pull parents and systems closer together, but instead It was like tossing a boulder into still water. The ripples spread, but so did the tension. I could almost hear whispers entwining on. The crumpled medical record I wrestled with felt like a symbol of everything that was wrong, not just in the execution of care, but in this never-ending power play that stifled compassion. How had it come to this? I gritted my teeth as I punched in lab results, my fingers gliding over keys that now felt foreign. Then came the false solution I hadn't seen coming. The supervisor made a surprise visit, offering an olive branch, or so I thought. "Clara, we want to recognize your commitment to patient safety. You've really made a difference by speaking up today," she declared in front of the team, her smile polished like a TV anchor's. "We might even feature you in next month's staff newsletter, a hero in nursing." My stomach twisted. Did they truly miss the point? Or were they playing me like a puppet on strings, a distraction from the truth? But the moment of pride faded quickly. The tension in the air thickened again as Dr. Penn rushed in, his urgency palpable, balling up that newfound confidence of mine in one swift motion. "We need to talk," he barked, eyes sharp as blades. I should have turned back to my patients. I should have let it go. With him close, I felt the weight of scrutiny pinning my shoulders down. "You think you can just leap in and question my authority in front of family?" He spat, the venom dripping off his words like a gallows noose tightening. "Let's see whose position crumbles first." The others watched silently, bracing for impact like unwilling spectators at a demolition derby. "And while we're at it," he glanced meaningfully at the rest of the team, "we can look into your record, Clara. Surely you've been too focused on making an impression." That hit like a slap. My cheeks burned crimson. Humiliation surged through me like ice-cold water, freezing every ounce of resolve I'd tried to build. I wanted to scream. Instead, I muttered a hasty sorry under my breath, like a child caught stealing cookies. With every moment that passed, I could feel the threads of camaraderie unraveling. The nurses who had stood behind me, the ones who had promised solidarity, now silently watched from the sidelines, their faces betraying only caution. I turned back to my patients, searching for solace, only to find Mr. Caldwell awake, looking confused and distressed, the helplessness in his eyes sending a fresh wave of guilt crashing over me. I pushed through my rounds, a fog closing in around me. I caught glimpses of the daybreak light creeping through the tinted windows, the sterile walls closing in like a prison cell. I needed solutions, a way to break free from this tension bubble that had ensnared both my judgment and my sanity. But then I heard the alarm. It rang out, sharp and unyielding, echoing through the ward like an accusation. Burst of adrenaline surged, and I sprinted toward the sound, driven by instinct. The hallway blurred past, the humming machines fading into oblivion as I skidded into Mr. Jacobs' room. But I should have known. The scene that greeted me was a nightmare, clad in white coats and sterile sheets. My colleagues had formed a rapid response crew around him, their faces masks of fear and focus. The air felt electric with panic, and the harsh overhead lights almost seemed to taunt me with what was unfolding. What had happened? I couldn't breathe as I watched them whirl around my patient, their frantic commands and pleading voices blending into a cacophony of chaos. Was it my fault? In a moment's trepidation, those accusations from Dr. Penn seeped back. Was I somehow responsible for this? With everything escalating, a familiar smile on my face faded into despair for the truth I had already sensed radiating around me. No, if I was on the chopping block, he wouldn't let up. As I stood, paralyzed with indignation, the unmistakable sound of mounting accusations filled the air. "Clara's been overstepping," one nurse said, voice dripping with doubt. "She's been a liability." "Did you catch that mistake on Mr. Jacobs' chart?" another added, pointing an accusing finger straight at me. "He shouldn't even be in this room." "This is reckless." I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to unravel their nonsense and point out the real negligence flowing from them. But before I had the words, the tension coiled like a rattlesnake waiting to strike. And that's when I heard a voice that would change everything. The alarm blared like a siren, an insistent reminder of the chaos that had erupted from my careless moments. I stood there, frozen, at the threshold of Mr. Jacobs' room, the stark reality hitting me like a punch to the gut. The nurses had turned against me, their whispers slicing through the air, every accusation a dagger. I could see the fear in their eyes, the way they avoided my gaze, and the collective tension hung heavy, a palpable weight pressing down on my shoulders. I had been voicing concerns for so long, advocating for safety and transparency, and now, as I watched them crowd around Mr. Jacobs, I realized this wasn't just a battle for my credibility. It was a fight for my very livelihood. Dr. Penn's voice broke through the noise, a harsh command filled with unspoken threats. "Step aside. You've done enough." I felt my heart race, each pulse of blood echoing my indignation. "What do you mean, done enough?" I shot back, incredulity sharpening my voice. "He's my patient too. Just because you wield the title doesn't mean I'll let you drown him in your negligence." That earned me a few startled looks, brows lifted in surprise that I dared raise my voice. But the nurses didn't waver. I was now an obstacle, a liability. I stood taller, refusing to let their stares crush me despite every fiber of my being screaming that I was alone. "Take a seat, Clara," another nurse, Jenna, said, her tone soaked in condescension. "You're clearly not in a rational state to be involved." She gestured grandly to the empty chair by the nurse's station, and the way she motioned was almost mocking. "Rational?" I spat, pressing my palms against the countertop to ground myself. "Rational doesn't save lives, Jenna. Lack of accountability does." I could feel the room's tension thickening. The walls felt like they were closing in like a vice, and I was at the center of it all, dangling from a noose that they had tied around my neck. The air crackled, thick with unspoken words and stifled dissent. The others silently stood by, watching me with a mix of concern and disdain, their eyes darting between me and Dr. Penn like chess players with their next moves calculated. I thought I must look desperate, maybe even pathetic, fighting this man, while others stood aloof, as if their silence was a shield against getting themselves involved. "Clara," Dr. Penn said, pacing back and forth, "do you really think the administration is going to take your side after this? You've made your bed, and now you're lying in it. You could lose your job for making these wild accusations." My stomach lurched at the weight of his words, the reality crashing down on me like a wave. Lose my job? Everything I fought for, every missed family dinner, every personal sacrifice, it could all vanish in a heartbeat. "What about the patients, Dr. Penn?" I said, voice shaking but steady. "What about their lives that you're willing to toy with, all for profit? You don't care about any of this." He stepped closer, his eyes glinting with menace that froze my breath. "Careful, Clara. You're stepping into dangerous territory. You can't just accuse people without consequences." The surrounding nurses shifted uncomfortably. There was an unspoken agreement hanging like a noose over me. I could see it in their faces. They wanted to turn away, to shut the door on my fight, but I refused to lower my head. But then the weight of it all threatened to crush me. I felt the heat of humiliation rise in my cheeks, a bold flush that ignited my anger but left me feeling raw and exposed. My forehead beaded with sweat, and I could feel all their eyes on me, judging, analyzing every flicker of emotion that washed over my face. I could feel the urge to surrender swell within me, wanting to hide from this circus of scrutiny. For a split second, I considered stepping back. Maybe Jenna was right. Maybe I'd just been too caught up in the chaos of care to think clearly. The tears that threatened to spill were hot, angry, yet they reminded me of all the late shifts. The fear, the joy dwindled to mere survival. I didn't want to fall apart in front of my colleagues, or make things worse. But then I remembered Mrs. Thompson's frail hands and Mr. Caldwell's chuckle, how their lives were woven into mine, how their stories mattered no matter what walls were built around us. If I crumbled now, I would let them down. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw someone moving toward me. It was Maya, my one ally amidst the storm. With each step she took, I felt a spark of hope flicker back to life. But she wasn't just moving toward me. She was marching through the crowd of reluctant witnesses who had fallen silent, her face set in determination. "Dr. Penn," she called out, voice strong, slicing through the tension like a blade. "This isn't just about Clara. You know the standards you've been bending, and we can't allow it." Their gazes shifted to her, surprise mingling with begrudging respect. Maya continued, "We can't stand by while patients suffer. You're violating everything we were taught to put them first. If you want to treat Clara like this, then it's a betrayal to us all. We have a responsibility." I felt a swell of energy rise in me. Maya's words fueled the fire I thought I would lose. She was willing to stand by me and finally voice what I had feared saying. It was more than just a fight. It became a stand for everything I believed in. Suddenly, the tide was shifting. "You think you can sweep this under the rug, Penn?" Maya continued, her voice unwavering. "You can't oppress the truth just because it's inconvenient." But just as quickly, 2 other nurses conspired to undermine her words, their whispers clawing at my resolve. "You're going to regret this," they hissed, their expressions taut. "Fight like this, and you'll both end up out of here." In the chaos of it all, I felt the collective scrutiny push against me, believing I could still lose everything. Job, identity, dignity. The humiliation came rushing back. The idea of standing alone, looming larger than before, threatening to consume me whole. The tension rattled through the room like lightning, and I felt close to breaking again. But I didn't know yet that someone unexpected was about to stand up for me. The tension in the room was like a heavy fog, wrapping around me, squeezing tighter with every heartbeat. Maya stood by my side, her presence a flicker of hope in the suffocating atmosphere. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on us, weighing our words, judging our res. The chaotic spikes of panic from moments before unfolded into a surreal backdrop, and I watched as the frayed edges of the paper danced at my feet. It was a chart I hadn't seen before, abandoned amidst the flurry of accusations. As I leaned down instinctively to pick it up, I noticed that the name on the top made my pulse thrum in alarm. Mr. Jacobs. Wasn't he the patient we had just rushed in here to save? The papers trembled in my fingers, and I felt something churn deep inside me as I opened it, my eyes scanning the rows of neat handwriting and scribbled notes. But then something caught my eye, a detail buried amidst the meticulous entries. I squinted at a signature that wasn't Dr. Penn's, the scrawl belonging to someone I didn't recognize. Every instinct in my body screamed that there was something profound hidden within. Could this be the key that would untangle the web woven around me? "Clara!" Maya's voice pulled at my consciousness like a lifeline emerging from the depths. "What are you doing? This isn't right. Look at this chart," I murmured, flipping the pages quickly, desperate to make sense of the jumbled thoughts flashing like strobe lights in my mind. The scrawl of that unfamiliar signature loomed over me like a specter. I felt a primordial fear that something was not just off, but rotten. Maya leaned in closer, her brow furrowing as she scanned the details. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice low, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile moment. "There's an entry here I never saw before." "This doesn't match what we did," I said, my voice wavering as doubt crept into my mind. It feels like someone is trying to cover for a mistake. As my fingers rifled through the papers further, I glimpsed another detail that twisted the knife deeper. A date, just 2 days ago, scrawled at the bottom of the last page. It was just before Mr. Jacobs had entered our care, and beside it, what should have been a clinical directive turned into a jarring red flag. Non-urgent status adjusted without notification. My stomach churned. What did that mean? I felt the crack of the truth turning over like a storm, gut-wrenching yet intoxicating in its chaotic rush. Had someone played with the admission protocol, altering Mr. Jacobs' status without informing the staff? I looked at Maya. I could feel the realization settling between us like an unexploded bomb. Before I could process this revelation further, the doors swung open with a force that startled me back to the present. In walked an unexpected face, Ben, the hospital's newest intern, one I often brushed shoulders with in the busy corridors. He looked frantic, his brow slick with sweat, eyes wild with panic as he made his way toward Dr. Penn. "Dr. Penn, you need to hear this," he stammered, and my heart sank. What could this kid, barely out of medical school, possibly know that would stack another layer onto this already precarious situation? Dr. Penn's irritation surfaced, but the urgency in Ben's voice had captured his attention. "Not now, Ben," he warned, dark eyes narrowing in frustration. "We're dealing with something serious here." But Ben pressed on, desperation dancing in his voice. "No, I mean it. The system is flagging Mr. Jacobs's file. It's been altered." A silence so heavy it felt tangible smothered the room. I glanced at the chart in my hands, dread pooling in my stomach. I didn't need to hear more. It cemented everything I feared was happening. This was manipulation of something much larger than I had even begun to comprehend. "Altered how?" Dr. Penn snapped, irritation flaring like a match in the dark. "Mr. Jacobs' status wasn't changed just for hospital protocol. It was changed to divert attention somewhere else," Ben stammered, and my heart raced as his words punctured the fog thickening around me. Just as I reached for clarity, Ben's next words hit like shrapnel. "Then there's a record of communications, hospital prints. It connects to a certain rogue contact who's been siphoning money from supplies." "Enough." Dr. Penn's voice rang out sharp, slicing through the murmur of panic that followed. "You're crossing a line, Ben. You know nothing of this." But Ben's face was resolute, his shoulders squared. "I know more than you think," he muttered, his voice faltering. And then, in that moment of charged tension, I felt it, a shift in the air, the kind of shift that could unearth the truth, like an old wound now brought to the surface. I was teetering on the edge, wanting to plunge into the depths of this revelation, but terrified that my insistence would drag me down as well. Everything within me screamed to press forward, to demand answers, but in the warring silence that followed, the last shred of doubt crawled deep into my mind. What if this was a trap? Ben looked over at me, recognition flashing in his eyes like a lifeline offered in murky waters. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Clara, we can't let this go unnoticed. You need to stay sharp. There are people here who want to bury this, people who need to be exposed, and they'll do anything to protect themselves." Everything around me narrowed, just the two of us, against the tide of a monumental truth, one woven tightly within corrupt systems. Patience. Lives dangling precariously as pawns. But before I could voice my thoughts, a flicker of movement in my periphery caught my eye, drawing my attention back to Dr. Penn, who now seemed like a cornered creature, the threat flickering behind his facade of control. "What are you looking for, Clara?" He mocked softly, his energy suddenly predatory. "You think pointing fingers will save you? This isn't a game." But his words didn't pierce as deeply anymore. The tension within me shuddered, shifting. Was there a chance I could expose this? Does he even comprehend the cracks he's standing on? My mind raced, and I knew, somewhere within that chaos, I had the thread to unravel the whole web. And just as hope flared, a crack of understanding sparking between us all, it happened. I felt the room turn cold, the air thickening with the gravity of unspoken truths. A part of me realized that everything hinged on this moment. Was I equipped to pursue the truth, even if it led to unforeseen perils? But before I could answer that pressing question, the lights overhead flickered ominously, casting strange shadows around us. In that moment, I realized someone knew the truth and had just let it slip. The air was electric as the tension in the room hung heavy, like a thundercloud ready to burst. The sickening reality of the lies swirling around me started to claw at my insides anew. Each heartbeat echoed that nagging dread, reminding me that the walls were closing in as I gripped the hospital chart so tightly my knuckles turned pale. Ben's words hung in the air, a lifeline in the chaos, but I could feel the weight of uncertainty creeping back in. Maya stepped closer, her arms crossed defensively, and shot me a look that was half concern, half challenge. Frustration rose as I could see the wheels turning in her head. "Clara, this isn't just about you anymore," she murmured, her voice threaded with a resolve that made me lean in closer. "It's about everybody's lives." "You act like I need convincing," I snapped back, but the intensity of her gaze made me reconsider my own determination. Was I simply a pawn in someone else's game? Dr. Penn stood across the room, eyes narrowed, calculating and seething like a cornered animal. "In my office," he ground out, beckoning me with a wave of his long fingers, his voice dripping with the kind of authority that made you feel small. Now, I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, anger bubbling just below the surface. "You're not going to intimidate me," I shot back, inching forward instead of backing down. "Not anymore. You're the one who needs to be concerned." The sound of the door slamming against the wall cut off my words, and in a flash, the reality of our situation transformed around us. The moment held its breath as Ben took an audacious step forward, his face flushed with determination. "Clara's right. If anyone here is putting lives at risk, it's you, Dr. Penn." The room went still at those words. I could practically hear the collective gasp from the other staff, their eyes wide, minds racing to comprehend how things had spiraled. I could sense the weight of their judgment, all the compassionate nurses I had stood beside, now watching as the malicious game unfolded. Dr. Penn narrowed his eyes even further, the kind of predatory glare that made my skin crawl. "How dare you stand here and suggest that I'm the problem? I've been in this field long enough to know how to handle it. You're just a kid playing doctor." His attempt to belittle Ben ignited a fire within me. Each syllable felt like a stab in the back, aimed not just at him, but at every one of us who cared deeply about our patients. "You think throwing around titles will win this battle?" I shouted, rallying my fellow nurses to my side. "Let's not forget who put patients first in the middle of all your chaos." For a fleeting moment, I saw flickers of support in those faces, eyes shining with a familiar spark of empathy, as if they had finally broken free from the grip of the fear Penn had instilled in them. But then, I almost felt pity for him as he faltered. His bravado started to give way, a crack forming in his poise as he scoffed badly at Ben. "You think you can just step in and take my place? You're nothing but a cog in this machine. I'm the one who keeps it running." In that instant, something in me twisted painfully, nearly compounding into a desire to forgive him for being a coward. Yet deep down, I understood that forgiving him meant letting go of the truth, and it felt bleak and hollow to do that. I stood at a precipice, spaces of my heart battling against each other, one knowing that justice needed to be pursued no matter the cost. "Not this time," I muttered, trying to block out the guilt building like a wave within me. He took a step toward me, painted with desperation. "Clara, I've made mistakes. I can fix this. Just give me a chance. I swear I'll make it right, he begged, the facade shattering momentarily. We don't have to go down this road. But it didn't stop the resolution I felt bubbling up, fueled by my experiences and the multitude of moments where I had seen patients suffocate around him. This wasn't about one man. It was about the entire system that corroded around us until only ghosts of compassion remained. I'm sorry, Dr. Penn, I replied, each word intense and deliberate as they fell from my lips. But you've had your chances. With shaking hands, I withdrew the chart I'd picked up earlier, the one that now served as a weapon against his bleakness. You're going to unravel this with me, one way or another. I turned to the other nurses, now looking directly into their faces, pleading from deep down. We all deserve better. Our patients deserve better. I held the chart high, the fluorescent lights reflecting off it almost like a spotlight, illuminating not just the document, but the truth that lingered within those lines. We can't hide from negligence that's been swept under the rug. Not anymore. A deep, oppressive silence settled, one that could have suffocated the very air from our lungs. And as I stood there, chart in hand, unwavering in my resolve, a chain reaction ignited. The nurses murmured amongst themselves, some nodding, others beginning to understand the depth of our collective silence. Maya stepped up, her voice steadier than ever. I'll back you, Clara. We need to bring this to light, no matter the consequences. This isn't just about any of us anymore. So many of my colleagues rallied around us. I saw the glimmers of courage spark in their gazes. It was electrifying, the way the tide shifted. We were no longer silent supporters, afraid of the looming consequences. We were a wall, no longer separate buildings, but a unified fortress standing firm against the storm clouds that had darkened our way too long. Dr. Penn's face contorted in disbelief. I could see the storm brewing in his eyes as he sputtered in outrage. You can't do this. I'm the one trying to protect our interests. You're throwing away your careers. His voice had turned frantic, a sharp contrast that revealed how truly desperate he was. I'd rather lose my job than lose a patient because of your greed. I shouted, a powerful wave of defiance thrumming through me. A weighty tension slowed our breaths, a thrum of understanding racing between us, each of us acknowledging that the moment had arrived. It was a turning point, a flash of clarity, a decision made. With one profound step, I spoke what we all knew. We're bringing this to the board. We'll expose everything. The finality of the statement rang through the air, tinged with victory. And as despair loomed on Dr. Penn's face, I felt an infusion of strength ripple through me. I turned and looked at Maya, signaling her to grab the missing patient's file that Ben had mentioned. The truth would rise. It would breach this barrier. Your games are over, Penn, I announced, filled with conviction, slamming the chart down in front of him. And so is your reign of deception. Outside these sterile walls, the truth no longer felt heavy, more like a liberation waiting to unfold. I could finally breathe, every ounce of tension released, as the last weight tethering this momentous fight broke free. My heart raced with exhilaration as I whispered under my breath, "There's no going back now." Because sometimes the hardest battles call forth the brave among us to wrestle victory from shadows into blazing truth. I stood outside the hospital on a crisp autumn morning, the sun trying to break through the clouds like a promise of better days ahead. It had been 6 months since that explosive day in the ward, the day we confronted Dr. Penn, blew the lid off the negligence that had upended lives, and began to stitch back together the fragments of our broken system. My heart was lighter now, filled with hope and purpose as I thought back to the whirlwind that had followed our rebellion. After our united front, it hadn't been easy. The investigation took its toll on everyone involved, including me. I remember sleepless nights worrying about the fallout, half-heartedly responding to Mark's messages, and going through the motions at home. But amid the chaos, I found an unexpected camaraderie with my colleagues as we rallied together. We became a family. We shared dinners after shifts, turned our pain into passion, and transformed our energy into advocating for lasting changes within Westbridge City Hospital. There was something magical about that cohesion. We met with administrators, pushed for transparency in patient care, and even started a patient safety committee, giving voices to those who felt unheard. As word spread, advocacy advocates from all around the state reached out, eager to lend support, and we soon became a part of a larger movement, a wave of change that was too powerful to ignore. Today, I stand in front of a more vibrant hospital, one that acknowledges its flaws and strives for betterment. New policies are in place, protecting staff and patients alike, ensuring safety takes priority over profits. That day led to renovations in our guidelines, implemented training hours focusing on patient-centered care, and increased staffing to support our ever-growing community. I heal differently now. I embrace the journey, ready for another day. I couldn't help but smile back. Always. The irony settled in like a warm blanket. Here we were, once at odds with a system that wanted nothing more than to silence us, now leading the charge toward a brighter future. Every moment I spent in that hospital reinforced my resolve to be the healer I always wanted to be, not just for my patients, but for the entire community. I may have stepped into the abyss of chaos and uncertainty, but what I found on the other side was resilience and a newfound vitality that infused every shift. I was still Clara Brooks, the nurse who met confusion with courage, but now I wore that title with a sense of pride. The years of feeling like a cog in the system had transformed me into an advocate for the voiceless and the vulnerable. Today, I step back into the ward, not just as a protector, but as a tangible change. And as I took that first step onto the hallowed ground of the elderly ward, I knew I was home. The morning sun poured through the hospital windows, casting a warm glow across the bustling ward. I wasn't sure if it was the coffee or the renewed hope that left me buzzing with energy as I walked in. Each step reinforced my commitment to this transformation, into the kind of nurse I'd always wanted to be, and into the kind of change our patients deserved. Those 6 months since our stand against Dr. Penn had reshaped my life and the entire ethos of Westbridge City Hospital. The place that once felt like an unrelenting machine had now become a vibrant community fostered by compassion and advocacy. I could see it in the eyes of my colleagues and felt it in the sanitized air we breathed. Change is hard, but knowing we adopted transparency filled the hallways with a stronger pulse, one that reflected the patients who filled them. As I rounded the corner, I spotted Maya and Ben chatting. The laughter in their voices wove through the chatter of patients and families, creating a melody that reminded me of why we fought so hard. "Clara," Maya called out, waving me over. "Guess what? The Nurses Committee just got approved for the new initiative. The wellness program will finally kick off next month." My heart soared at the news. We'd spent countless hours drafting proposals, brainstorming ideas, and now they were coming to life. "That's fantastic," I exclaimed, my excitement bubbling over. "It'll be a game changer for everyone here," Ben chimed in. "And we've secured a series of community workshops. We're going beyond just medical care. We're bringing in speakers on mental health and holistic care. It's all part of shifting the culture." "I can't believe it's finally happening," I said, looking at the two of them. Their support had made all the difference, and it felt like a triumph shared by all of us. But underneath that joy lingered a bittersweet tinge. This was it. I'd poured my heart and soul into this hospital, built deep connections with my patients, and shared my fears and victories with this team. But I was ready to move on for the greater good. My decision to continue my studies and pursue a nurse practitioner track loomed just on the horizon. Later that week, the hospital held a ceremony to celebrate our newfound direction. a chance to acknowledge not just our triumphs, but the patients who inspired us every day. As I took the stage to speak, my heart raced. We've all felt the weight of this journey, but it's been worth every moment. Compassionate care needs a voice, and together, we've solidified that voice in unity. This hospital isn't just a workplace, it's a home for healing. I caught sight of Mrs. Thompson in the audience, sitting with her family, her frail hands resting on her grandson's shoulder. She beamed with pride, and I knew my conviction was reflected in her grateful gaze. We must keep fighting for change, I continued, emotion thickening my voice. Let's make this a place where every patient feels heard, valued, and respected. When I stepped off the stage, Maya and Ben welcomed me back to the fold, their eyes brimming with admiration. There would be challenges ahead, new dynamics to address, but I knew we would face them together, unyielding and connected. As the applause faded, we exchanged glances filled with promise and assurance. In that moment, surrounded by warmth and gratitude, I could finally exhale all the heaviness that had burdened my heart. Months passed, and as I prepared for the next chapter in my life, I found peace within the chaos. I watched as my fellow nurses began to thrive in their own initiatives, blossomed into powerful advocates, and nurtured the culture of safety and empathy. That was the legacy we were building, one rooted in care, not complacency. And I knew that by following my passion, I'd not only be healing others, but continuing the fight in a new arena. Stepping into the future felt bright. But before I left, I realized there was one last thing I needed to say, and I could feel the urgency bubbling up inside me. Don't forget the fight for the voiceless, and don't forget to push for what's right, wherever you are. For those still in the trenches, your voices matter. Advocate, always. Together, we can create a ripple that shifts the tide of healthcare everywhere. Now, take a moment, subscribe immediately to stay updated on more exclusive stories that could inspire change. Smash that like button now to spread the word and feed the algorithm. I want to hear your reactions, so flood the comments section with your thoughts and theories about our journey. And don't forget to share this with at least 5 friends who need to hear this message. Let's make sure this change echoes far and wide.